Very few know, but the first prototype of the T-28 was called the XSN-2J-1, and it was a tail dragger. We always thought that the T-28 looked better in this configuration, so at that point, why not just make it a bush plane? The build was straightforward. We used some pre-cut metal, plywood, and a decent bit of glue to secure the gear on the plane. Then, hoping for a bit more elevator authority at lower airspeeds, we lengthened the elevator. The first flight with the T-28 in tail dragger configuration went well.
Let's go on.
But Ben still felt underwhelmed by the plane because it didn't really change the way it flew. So, we decided to throw some slats on the plane. Now, if these look comically large to you, it's not just the video. They genuinely looked awful in person too. But the thinking behind it was that it's better to have them too large and trim them down to size as needed, which really is the same technique behind avoiding that disaster haircut. Moving forward. The flight plan was to do some bunny hops, see how it felt, and if Ben liked what he saw, he'd continue the takeoff. Right after getting airborne and entering ground effect, Ben liked what he was feeling stability-wise, so he continued his takeoff. Unfortunately, he realized the second that he was at full throttle that he could not get the plane to climb.
Dude, I was full up elevator and I just could not pull out of that.
Oh, there was no lift.
It created no lift.
We're not exactly aero engineers, but we talked to a couple friends of ours who are, and they agreed that having slats set up that aggressively likely resulted in much more drag than lift. After adding some more weight to the plane in the form of glue and trimming the bangs, or slats back, it was time for another attempt at flight. It was a little windy, but if anything, that helped it get up quicker.
Oh yeah, I have elevator now.
How's it feel?
A lot better. Woo! Oh.
As the day went on, the wind calmed a little, and Ben took it up again. This time, the flight plan was to do some testing at the edge of the envelope. As Ben violently jammed the stick around, trying to get the plane to bite him, you could immediately tell that the critical angle of attack was at a much higher deck angle or attitude than the stock one was without slats. The slats were doing their job. The rest of the day consisted of getting used to doing short field landings with the plane. It's hard to tell in the video, but we did set up the plane to have flaperons. This came with its own set of challenges because the slats already reduced the aileron's effectiveness. Whatever was left of that effectiveness was completely diminished once flaperons were introduced. Ultimately, Ben could tell that it was doing something, so he came up with a workaround for it. When he was stable on a short final, he would drop the final set of flaps. This took a little time to get used to, but he eventually got it down. First, Ben and Misha went out to an empty boat launch where they could start testing the limits of the plane's true off-airport capabilities. Now for some legit bush flying. Ben opted to take off into the wind even though that meant taking off straight at some trees. He quickly entered a left bank once the wheels were up and began the tight approach. The first one went alright, but Ben wanted to do this a few more times to see if he could get some better landings in. Ben and Misha had done just about everything they could at this location at this point, so they moved on to the next spot, which was a tight pathway off a river. The difficult part about this approach was that there was no going around. There was a gate and tall trees immediately behind the landing site, so it was one way in, one way out. Setting up for an approach was easy. Ben went out further than he thought he had to in order to be conservative. Unfortunately though, neither of these two landings were as clean as Ben wanted. Rather than push their luck, both Ben and Misha thought it would be better to continue walking to the final spot they had scoped out. The 20-minute walk to the next site was worth it. They found a little dirt runway carved out among big rocks. Taking off was a bit of a challenge because the big rocks made maintaining directional control difficult on the ground, but Ben got it down eventually. The first landing attempt went well, but it all happens very quick. At the end of the day, this T-28 wasn't ever designed or tested for this kind of flying. They opted to give it another shot since they made the long walk out, but it didn't go quite as smoothly this time. Ben dropped the flaps all the way a little too early, which meant that he had essentially no roll authority and, as a result, missed the runway. The sun was now setting, so the boys decided to pack it up and head out. If you'd like to see some further testing with this plane, we'd love to hear it. If you haven't already, consider giving this video a like, or maybe even hitting the subscribe button. Happy landings, and be sure to bounce one on for us next time.
What is he doing? Hydrating.